Professor Joleen Steyn Kotze is a political analyst joining us now here from our studios, not too far from the floor itself. And I keep saying this, Prof. Hello, by the way. Great to see you.
Good morning.
Welcome to the SABC. I feel like I'm talking a bit louder than I was 48 hours ago because, the stakes are certainly getting higher. A whole lot more people are here, and naturally, people want to gauge their sense. You and I have been speaking off air. It's almost, I don't want to say irrelevant, but the picture can change drastically from this moment till even this evening. However, it is worth just getting a quick reflection on what we're seeing so far. The MK party, interestingly enough, being in the top 3 according to the CSIR, who have a pretty high accuracy rate at around 14% at a national level. Does that come as a surprise to you?
I'm going to answer you in a way to say yes and no.
Sure.
So traditionally, if we look at the introduction of new political parties, so we look at COPE in 2009, you look at the EFF in 2014, what the results in the election results and data teach us is that when there is a new player, you very often find that new player inevitably makes the top 3. At a national ballots level. So you saw that with COPE in 2009, you saw that with the EFF in 2014. In 2019, we had some new political parties coming in, but not necessarily, I think, with the energy that you had seen, for example, with COPE in their introduction, with the EFF in their introduction, and now with the MK with their introduction to the South African voting public.
Fascinating stuff. I'm really impressed by your composure as we heard that gong, because everybody kind of falls apart. That obviously tells us that we're seeing yet another update insofar as the numbers are concerned. We're up to, I think it's about 16%, if my eyesight is anything to go by, of the votes counted so far. Quite a big jump from the 14% we saw a short while ago. That puts the ANC past the 600,000 mark. It puts the MK party at 120 odd thousand, almost 130,000. I'm looking for the Democratic Alliance, over 410,000 votes for them, and the EFF at just about 136 odd thousand votes. So far, 1.6 million votes have been cast and counting. Important, of course, to continue reflect on that. We're still a long way to go before anybody can speak with a fair amount of certainty what's happening. As we look at the quantitative data, it's important to also reflect on what might be happening qualitatively. We've spoken to many analysts like yourselves who have shared their views around what's going on. And in fact, part of the work that you've done is to try and gauge the extent to which that's translated in how people vote. Tell us a bit more about that kind of work and the insights that come from that.
So we are very much a evidence-based social science organization, and with that, of course, we need to draw on data. And what is increasingly important is we run a survey, the South African Democracy Expert Survey, where we poll analysts and academic and political scientists and constitutional law experts. We kind of poll their perceptions on democracy, measuring democracy, and how we are doing in our democracy. And that becomes exceedingly important if you compare those results with a public survey and a public perception survey. And I think we're going to have a few more discussions about this as we carry on, but very often you find that there is a little bit of a disconnect around how experts are conceptualizing and measuring democracy vis-a-vis how a public perception might have a different view of measuring and conceptualizing democracy.
It really is fascinating, even though I know very little about it so far, because part of what it speaks to is this idea of agency, right? People using their own autonomy, making sure that their own voice is heard on their own terms, right? It's one thing to have experts, constitutional analysts speak, but what we're learning time and time again is that South Africans are still very much aware of that agency and exercise it when the need comes.
No, definitely, and I think it is also for that reason why very often when we're asked to make these predictions, it's very difficult because you need to be acutely aware of what is going on in the public imagination, what is going on in the public mind. And that, of course, requires a data-driven or an evidence-based process where you have gone out and conducted your research around voter behavior, voter perceptions, questions of trust, political trust is very important as well, because ultimately, if you use colloquial evidence, or you use anecdotal evidence that you see in news bulletins or on social media or any of those platforms, it gives us kind of a picture into a moment, but it does not necessarily provide us with a deeper understanding of some of the psychosocial drivers around voter behavior and around public perception. And also bearing in mind, we live in the age of disinformation, so very often what you see on social media might not necessarily be a trusted source.
Absolutely. Despite all of that, there's kind of been a constant, at least in our young democracy, and that is the story of the ANC. You know, it's still featuring so prominently even in 2024. Of course, it evolves in different ways, but now the discussion is around whether or not the governing party will be able to pass that 50% threshold. What is interesting to also note is typically where the ANC support comes from. You know, in many instances, where you are in the country, it appears matters for the ANC.
Definitely, you know, I mean, we were chatting and I told you it's interesting, 30 years in democracy for me, we are still asking how much is the ANC going to get, which seems to be a constant theme within our electoral journey. So, you know, I think if you look at the spread of ANC support and kind of how the parties I don't want to use the word identity, it's a bit too strong, so let's say rather support base, has changed and shifted. It really does seem in these early days that the rural vote really matters. You know, that your ANC strongholds, for example, within the Eastern Cape, that the party had used as well to bolster its support at national level, do become critical, but their voter turnout is also crucial. So you need to know who is going to the polls. Are we having voters going out to the polls, casting their votes for different parties, or are we having some party supporters going out to the polls to vote for their party and possibly ANC supporters rather abstaining and staying at home? And we will only know a bit more about that, of course, once more of the results are in and we can kind of start really looking at what the voter turnout was in various rural provinces. Fascinating,
only the beginning. I'm sure we'll hear a whole lot more from you. Professor Joleen Steyn Kotze, thanks very much indeed. I understand you'll still be around, so we'll hopefully be able to ventilate some of these issues in just a short while.